It was a calm morning in the lands of Kwame, where the sun had just begun to warm the vast savanna, painting the sky with a soft golden hue. The wind, ever present, whispered through the leaves of the trees, as if sharing ancient secrets that only the most attentive could hear. Kwame stood at the entrance of his hut, gazing at the horizon with a peaceful expression, but the thoughts running through his mind were far from calm. He felt the weight of his mother's pressure, who had already started talking about marriage, children, and the future of his lineage. He knew he couldn't escape this for much longer. Kwame, you need to think about your future. What will become of us if you don't leave your mark on the world? His mother would always say with that severe and worrying gaze. She couldn't understand the simple peace he had found in the field, nor his love for hunting, and the freedom he felt when running through the forest with his loyal friend, Taye. Taye, on the other hand, was the opposite of Kwame. Though the two shared a deep friendship, the differences between them were clear to everyone who knew them. Taye had a life of wealth and privilege. His family owned vast lands, with healthy cattle and abundant crops. He lived in a large house, while Kwame had only the essentials, nothing more. But that had never been a problem for Kwame. He was happy with what he had, because true wealth, for him, was found in what he did and the friendships he nurtured. The two had grown up together since childhood, running through villages, exploring the bush, and learning life's lessons under the guidance of the elders. Kwame and Taye were inseparable, but life's paths were inevitably leading them in very different directions. While Taye worried about the legacy he would leave, about his family's name and what the future would hold, Kwame had no such concerns. For him, the true legacy was the relationship he built with nature, the game he hunted to feed his community, and the solid friendship with Taye that gave him a sense of belonging and purpose. However, his mother's words echoed louder and louder, pounding in his mind like the distant beat of a drum. And the children, Kwame? What will your father say when you can't give him grandchildren? She didn't understand, didn't want to understand that Kwame's life was in his hands and that by choice he didn't seek tradition but something more intimate, something simpler. He wanted somehow to live like the ancients, without the need to maintain a legacy of wealth or inheritance. But the pressure of his lineage, the weight of family expectations, seemed stronger every day. Kwame turned and looked at Taye, who was sitting on a stone preparing his weapons. Taye was in his own world, in a place where his wealth and responsibilities gave him a sense of security that Kwame had never known. Taye's face reflected a serenity that only those without great concerns could reach. But Kwame knew, deep down, that even he wasn't free from something. Taye, with all his comfort, was facing his own battles. Kwame, what's troubling you, my friend? Taye asked, without lifting his eyes from his knife, carefully trimming the tip of an arrow. Kwame sighed and approached him, his heart heavy. He didn't want to talk about it, but he knew he couldn't carry the weight alone any longer. Taye, my mother, she won't stop talking about children, grandchildren. She wants me to be someone, to continue our lineage. Taye stopped, working on the arrows, and looked up at him with a compassionate expression. You are someone, Kwame. You don't have to follow others' rules to prove that. Life is about what you do with what you have. Kwame shook his head, frustration evident on his face. That's not what she thinks. She wants children, and I can't give that to her. He paused, feeling the weight of the words that left his mouth. I can't have children, Taye. I'm infertile. Taye remained silent for a moment, Kwame's words hanging in the air like a storm about to break. He knew that this moment was crucial. He knew his friend, understood the internal struggle he was facing, but nothing could have prepared him for what Kwame had just said. The silence between them grew until Taye finally spoke gently, as someone who knows that a response won't be easy. Kwame, my friend, you know that if you need anything, I'm here. No matter what you need. Kwame looked at him, his eyes heavy with sadness and shame. He didn't want to ask for help, didn't want to be in this position, but the words escaped before he could stop them. Taye, I need I need a child. I need you to help me give my mother the legacy she expects." The tension hung in the air. Taye took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Kwame. He felt the weight of the request, knowing that it would change everything between them. But looking at his friend, Taye also knew that for some reason he couldn't refuse. Their friendship was stronger than anything. I'll help, Kwame. But understand, this won't be easy. Things will never be the same again." Taye finally said, with a seriousness that was rare in him. Kwame knew that. He knew that by accepting Taye's help, he was stepping into unknown territory, a path with no return. But at that moment, he saw no other choice. The pressure from his mother, the weight of tradition, the need to please, all of that pushed him toward an abyss. And so, on that warm Savannah morning, the bond between the two friends was about to be tested in a way neither of them could have predicted. The next morning brought with it a strange calm, as if the world itself knew that something was about to change. The sun was still low, spreading its soft colors across the sky, but for Kwame, the day felt heavy with a tension he couldn't shake. He didn't know how to tell his mother what he had just asked of Taye. The truth weighed heavily on his chest, but the words seemed suffocated, held back by something deeper that he couldn't understand. As he walked through the field, his hands firmly gripping his hunting knife, he felt the weight of fate on his shoulders. This was the moment when the line between honor and desperation blurred. Kwame didn't want to resort to this, but necessity, that invisible and relentless force, pushed him to move forward. Taye had promised to help him, but still, a knot tightened in his stomach. He had asked for something big, something irreversible. And the truth was, he didn't know if his friendship with Taye would survive this. The line between loyalty and shame was beginning to blur, and Kwame could feel it in every breath he took. That afternoon, he went to Taye's house, located in the wealthier part of the village. The tall palm trees and well-maintained grounds made Taye's house one of the most impressive in the region, a fortress of luxury amidst the simplicity of life in the savannah. But contrary to what many thought, the large house didn't bring peace to Taye's heart. He had always felt more comfortable in the forests and fields, where freedom was his only wealth. But now, he had no way to escape the commitments life had imposed on him. And with Kwame's request, both were about to embark on something beyond their control. Kwame arrived at Taye's house and found him sitting in the large courtyard, where the children and wives were playing and working. Taye looked up when he saw him, his eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and understanding. Kwame didn't need to say a word. Taye already knew what had happened. He stood up immediately, and the two of them walked into the garden, away from the ewe. Others' sight. "Kwame," Taye began, his voice low. "You knew this wouldn't be easy. It can't just be a decision between us. There are things I, with all my wealth, can't control." Kwame looked at him, feeling the weight of the words, but what he had to say was already formed in his mind. "Taye, you said you'd help. I know. This decision isn't simple, but I need you to help me. I don't know what else to do. My mother won't forgive me if I fail. What else can I do, my friend?" Taye looked at him with an intense gaze, but also one filled with a sadness Kwame hadn't seen before. He knew that, despite everything, Kwame would never make such a decision without something true in his heart. But the answer was clear. Kwame's pressure, his fight for acceptance, was stronger than anything else. "Kwame," Taye said slowly, "I'll do this. But I can't guarantee that things will stay the same. I can't guarantee that this won't bring pain to all of us. You understand that, don't you?" Kwame nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He knew Taye was right. What he was asking for was a rupture, a change that couldn't be ignored. But the alternative seemed even crueler. The shame and loneliness that threatened him, the thought of living with the guilt of not meeting his mother's expectations, was unbearable. "I understand, Taye. I know nothing will be easy. I know things will change, but I don't know what else to do. I need a child. I need my mother to have a reason to believe that my life has a greater purpose." Taye remained silent for a moment, his eyes gazing at the horizon. The breeze passing by seemed to carry the sound of the choices they were about to make. as if the wind too felt the gravity of the moment. "Then let's do it, Kwame. I'll help you, but know that there will be many things beyond our control. And when the truth comes out, nothing will be the same." Kwame felt a brief moment of relief, but soon doubt began to creep into his mind again. He looked at Taye, and in his chest, fear grew like a shadow. "I know. I can't promise that everything will turn out well, but I trust you, Taye, and I hope you trust me too." They looked at each other for a moment, as if the words weren't enough to bridge the distance growing between them. It wasn't about pure friendship anymore. It was about something more complex, about decisions that would change their lives forever. The decision had been made. Both of them knew that the path ahead would be torturous and difficult, and from that moment on, nothing would be the same. Kwame's life, which had once seemed simple and uncomplicated, was now about to intertwine with Taye's choices and shadows. And like any secret, this truth had the power to destroy what mattered most. Kwame felt a mix of gratitude and fear, as if he were asking too much, but at the same time, as if he had lost control of his own story. But what else could he do? The pressure from the world, the pressure from his mother, all the things he feared had come together, and he found himself more entangled, unsure whether he could ever break free. Taye, on the other hand, felt the friendship he had sworn to protect beginning to disintegrate. They were about to cross a boundary, and he didn't know if, in the end, both would be able to bear the weight of what they were about to do. And so, with a promise made between them but hearts full of doubt, they parted that day, knowing that the future would be both a blessing and a curse. The wind blowing that morning carried a taste of change, something subtle, like a premonition that Kwame's life was about to take an irreversible turn. The village was still asleep, and the first rays of the sun began to seep across the land, with a softness that contrasted with the turmoil bubbling in Kwame's heart. Zola, his wife, was still in bed, her eyes closed, breathing peacefully. She didn't know the truth yet, but Kwame knew that what he was about to ask of Taye could put everything at risk. The shame he felt, the weight of such a big lie, made it even harder to bear. But the decision had been made. Zola had never known about Kwame's struggle. She had always believed that their marriage was based on genuine love, and she trusted him completely. Kwame knew this, and that was what tormented him the most. Not just the pain of deceiving his mother, but the pain of deceiving Zola, the woman he loved most. He watched her as she slept, her body curled in a delicate way. He thought about the words he would have to say when the time came. But in that moment, the sounds of the awakening village surrounded him, and with them, the responsibilities of his simple life called him back to reality. The daily ritual of hunting, tending to the land, ensuring food made it to the table. These all seemed so trivial in the face of the great lie he was starting to build around himself. But he had no choice. He had no choice. Kamau was born on a calm night without omens, without signs that Kwame and Zola's world would change forever. The birth was quick, easier than Zola had imagined, but the happiness she felt in holding her child soon faded under Kwame's distant reaction. He looked at her with a forced smile, as if trying to believe that everything was fine. But something inside him was breaking. He didn't see Kamau as his son. He saw only a reminder of his lie, a lie that was becoming more tangled by the day. Zola didn't immediately notice. To her, little Kamau was perfect, a gift she and Kwame had eagerly awaited. But Kwame was distant, and she could feel it. Sometimes he became too quiet, staring at the child with a vacant look, as if lost in his own thoughts. He held Kamau with the tips of his fingers, as if afraid the baby would slip from his hands and reveal the secret he kept. In the first days after the birth, Zola devoted herself entirely to Kamau. She loved that little being with all the intensity of her soul, and the baby's laughter was all she needed to feel complete. Kwame watched from afar, more and more isolated, more and more filled with an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. It felt as though he was living a life that wasn't his, playing a role he didn't want to play. And with each passing day, the pain in his chest grew sharper, harder to bear. Zola, for her part, tried to maintain normalcy. She believed that Kwame was just tired, that the responsibility of fatherhood had been an unexpected burden for him. And in a sense, she was right. Kwame was not the man she thought he was. He didn't know how to deal with Kamau, with the small life that now depended on him. And his guilt, the shame of asking Taye to help him have a child, grew inside him, like an untamable flame. He withdrew, felt lost, unable to face the woman who loved him and the son he should have loved. The days passed, and with them, the reality began to feel even harder to ignore. Kamau, with his curious eyes and innocent smile, seemed to look right through Kwame, as if he knew that he wasn't what he appeared to be. There was something in the boy's eyes that unsettled Kwame, a silent perception, as if the truth was hovering there, in the air, waiting to be discovered. As time passed, Kwame's behavior became more erratic. He pulled away more and more from Zola and the child, going hunting alone or spending hours in silence, thinking about everything that had happened. He often wondered if Kamau would miss him, if the boy would ever know the truth, if the truth would eventually come out, inevitably, like a storm that could not be stopped. Zola, noticing that something was wrong, tried to approach him, but with each attempt, he closed himself off. More. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel that something was broken, something she couldn't fix. With every empty look from Kwame, every forced smile, she felt a knot tightening in her chest. The weight of the lie Kwame carried was no longer something he could bear. And when he looked at Kamau for the last time that morning, something inside him broke. The love he felt for his son was not the love of a father, but the love of someone who felt guilty, ashamed. He knew he was failing Kamau, treating him as if he were just a reminder of his own inadequacy. Zola entered the room, her steps silent. She watched her husband for a moment, her eyes full of concern and pain. "Kwame, what's happening? You're so distant. I need you here with both of us. Kamau needs you. I need you." He didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. The Sakar. Truth seemed so far away, so impossible to reach that he felt more alone than ever. That child, the one he had helped bring into the world, was not his. There was no denying it, no escaping it. Zola watched him for a moment, her eyes still filled with love, but also with growing frustration. She knew something wasn't right, but what could it be? She didn't know, but somehow she felt that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was something much deeper, something she couldn't yet understand. Kwame looked at the child in Zola's arms, and at that moment, he knew. The lie, the distance, all of it was just beginning, and the life as he knew it would never be the same again. Time, with its relentless march, began to weave an invisible web among the members of the family, a network of lies that no one could clearly see, but everyone could feel. The air inside Kwame and Zola's house had become dense, filled with a palpable tension that grew each day. Kamau, now a few months old, was starting to show the first signs of curiosity about the world around him. His eyes sparkled with the curiosity of a child wanting to understand everything, and this, in some way, made Kwame's lie even more unsustainable. Every time he looked at Kamau, an unease would cross him. It was no longer the simple discomfort of failing at something small. It was a visceral feeling, a pain that seemed to root itself in his chest, where fear and shame began to sprout, sending deep, twisted roots. Kwame no longer knew who he was. The man who smiled at Kamau like a father didn't feel like a true father. He felt like an imposter, a liar who, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't love his child as he should. And with every look from Zola, he saw her trust unraveling piece by piece like delicate silk torn by the wind. Zola, for her part, was beginning to notice something. She didn't know what exactly, but she could feel it. The change in Kwame was undeniable. Every day he withdrew. More, and she didn't understand why. In the first days after Kamau's birth, Kwame seemed nervous, but there was also something affectionate about him, an attempt to connect with his son, to be a present father. But now he was becoming colder, more distant. He no longer held Kamau with the same tenderness, as if the simple act of holding him was a painful reminder. And Zola, deep down, felt that Kwame's distance wasn't just physical. It was an emotional distance, something she couldn't reach, something she couldn't heal. Every time she tried to get closer, he pulled away. He spent more time alone in the forest, hunting, and when he returned, his eyes were lost, as if he carried such a heavy burden that her mere presence made him feel suffocated. And Zola, with her heart full of love and doubt, didn't know what to do. She loved him, but she didn't understand what was happening to him. Sometimes she felt that he was hiding something, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. She needed answers, but they were as distant as the truth itself. Kamau, however, was growing. He was no longer that fragile baby in Zola's arms, but a curious child, with his laughs and his first clumsy steps. He was the light of the house, the silent joy that spread through every corner. But curiously, he too seemed to sense that something was wrong. He didn't know what it was, but something in his childlike perception told him that things weren't as they seemed. When he looked at Kwame, something in his eyes, something in Kwame's gestures, made him feel that this man was not the father he should have. But Kamau was too young to understand fully. The truth was still too far for him, but somehow it was already present in his innocence. It was on one of these tense mornings that Zola decided she needed answers. She could no longer live in uncertainty, in the shadow of unspoken pain. She found Kwame sitting beneath a tree, staring at the horizon with a distant expression. She knew he was there, but not really there. His spirit was somewhere else, in some dark corner of his mind where he kept the secrets she feared. She approached slowly, her steps quiet, and sat beside him. "Kwame," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I need you to tell me what's going on. You can't keep going like this. You can't keep pulling away. I need you." Kwame looked at her, his tired eyes, and for a moment she thought he would tell her the truth, that he would confess everything, say how lost he felt, how guilty he was, but he said nothing. He just looked at her, speechless, and that made Zola's heart tighten even more. She felt the weight of the silence, the pain of an untold truth. "Zola," he began, his voice low and almost broken. "It's not what you think. It's not simple. I don't know what I'm doing. I've failed." Zola looked at him, trying to understand. "Failed at what, Kwame? At being a father? At being a husband? I don't understand. What's happening to you? What are you hiding from me?" He didn't respond immediately. The silence between them felt heavy, immense, like a wall slowly rising between them. Zola was so close to understanding the truth, but something stopped her from reaching the answer. What was he hiding? What couldn't he share with her? Kwame slowly stood up, and the pain in his eyes was enough for Zola to realize that something was about to break. But she didn't know. What? She wanted to understand, but the answer seemed distant, as if it were wrapped in a fog she couldn't dissipate. Time passed, and the lie, invisible, continued to spread, enveloping everyone in Kwame's house. He tried, no matter how much he wanted, to deny what he felt, but the truth was there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. But that moment hadn't come yet, and in the meantime, Kwame's pain, the distance he maintained from everyone around him, only grew. And Zola, unknowingly, began to feel that the questions in her mind were beginning to have answers. Not the answers she wanted, but the answers she feared. And the lie that Kwame had held so carefully was now on the verge of crumbling, taking everything with it. The morning was thick with an electric tension, like the air before a storm, silent but heavy with the weight of something about to break. The village was slowly beginning to wake, but inside Kwame and Zola's house, the world seemed to have stopped. Kamau, now almost a year old, sat on the floor, his curious eyes watching the adults, unaware of the storm approaching. The boy had Kwame's eyes, but there was something in them that seemed to ask for answers, something that would only be understood with time. Today, however, the answers would come sooner than anyone expected. Zola was in the kitchen, stirring the ingredients for lunch, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the morning before, when Kwame, after a long silence, finally looked her in the eyes and whispered, "Kamau is not my son." Those words, spoken so simply and directly, cut through the air like a sharp blade, leaving a deep, indelible mark on Zola's heart. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know how to react. The house was filled with a dense silence, almost deafening. Each step Zola took seemed to echo in her mind, every movement heavier than the last. She still hadn't fully processed what Kwame had said. His words were etched in her mind, but her heart refused to accept them. How could he say that? How could he look at Kamau, their son, and simply deny everything they had built together? Kwame sat on the porch, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on something Zola couldn't see. He looked like a man lost, a man who had drowned in his own lies and now didn't know how to get out of the water. The guilt that consumed him was evident in every line of his face, in every movement he made. He had failed, and now he knew there was no turning back. Zola walked into the room, her steps firm, determined. She couldn't wait anymore. She needed the truth. The truth, as painful as it was the only thing that could bring some kind of peace to the turmoil building inside her. "Kwame," she said, her voice trembling, but also filled with a strength she didn't know she had. "You told me Kamau isn't your son. Now you're going to tell me everything. You're going to tell me what's going on here. I can't live in doubt anymore." He looked at her with empty eyes, as though he knew the lie had finally come to an end. "I didn't want it to be like this, Zola," he murmured. "I never wanted to hurt you. But what I did, I can't carry this alone. I'm not his father. Taye was the one who helped. He was the one who had Kamau with you." Zola stood frozen, her eyes wide as though his words were still trying to find their way into her mind. "What? What are you saying, Kwame? Taye? What? How?" She couldn't process it. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered in her mind, but the picture was still jumbled, too confusing to understand. Kwame looked down, unable to meet Zola's eyes. I couldn't have children, Zola. I tried and tried and tried. But the truth is, I'm sterile. I couldn't give you the child you wanted so much. And so I asked Taye for help. He was the one who really had Kamau. He did it for me. For us." The words fell on Zola like an unbearable weight. Each one was a cold stone, thrown against her heart. She felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man she had married, the man she had shared so many moments with, was not who she thought he was. He had lied to her, deceived not only her but also Kamau, that little being who trusted him as a father. Zola took a step back, as if she needed space to breathe. She felt as though she were sinking in a sea of emotions that paralyzed her. "So you used me?" she asked, her voice shaking with both anger and sadness. "You used me to hide your lie, and made me believe Kamau was our son, when he wasn't any of that?" Kwame finally looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He was broken, and Zola could see that. She could see that he was more destroyed than she could have ever imagined. But that didn't lessen the pain. It didn't erase the betrayal, the lie he had crafted so cleverly yet was now crumbling. I didn't know what to do, Zola," he said, his voice low. "I knew how much you wanted a child, and I didn't want to lose you. But the truth is, I felt powerless. I didn't want to be a failure, and now I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness." Zola stood there, trying to understand what he was saying, trying to comprehend the depth of the pain he was feeling, but her own pain was too great. She didn't know if she could forgive him. She didn't know if she could look at him the same way. Everything she knew had been ripped from her as if it were a flower pulled out by its roots. And at that moment, the door opened, and Kamau entered the room, his little eyes shining with the innocence of a child who still didn't understand. The weight of what was happening around him. He looked at both of them, and Zola felt a tightness in her chest. How would she explain this to him? How would she tell him that the father he had grown up with wasn't really his father? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as if the entire world was waiting for the next word. Zola looked at Kwame, then at Kamau, and a wave of immense sadness washed over her. She didn't know what to do, but she knew everything had changed, forever, and no matter how hard she tried, there was no going back. The truth was finally before them, and whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again.